All right. Hello, everyone. I'm LeiLani Cauthen, the CEO and publisher at Learning Counsel News Media and Research. And we're with Columbus, Ohio today. We wanted to be there in person, but that was not in the cards because there's been some recent quarantines and things happening out there in Columbus. So we're going to record today for all of that area to be able to view at a later date. And some people will participate with us today, but we're going to give you the briefing first. So let me sort of walk through how the day is going to go. I have on the line with me today Doug Cauthen, who's our Chief Operating Officer. He'll be lurking in the background to make sure we get questions answered or anything like that, sort of managing us. We want to thank the No Story Social Ecosystem for Education, which is also the home of the Hybrid Logistics Project. I will talk about that a little bit later. And then also the EduJedi Leadership Society, which is filled with schools and districts and leadership that really contribute during the course of the year to our dictionary. This is the way the day is going to roll. I'm going to give you the briefing. We're going to take a brief break. And then also have Kimberly Knighty, who's the Director of Technology from North Canton City Schools, give us her perspective of what's happening out there. And then Dr. Lee Buddy, and then we'll finish off with a question and answer period for Dr. Lee Buddy and Jesse Ireland. So we're excited about that. So let me give you the briefing on what's happening in the market. So our national survey, we had 21,098 educators actually respond to it. Most of them didn't complete the full survey. They just sort of registered to be able to be looked at as EduJedi to see if they have a new level of accomplishment. And then we had 1,394 complete the full responses. That was 373 districts, 202 schools, and 819 teachers. So those are long surveys. If you've taken the survey yourself, you know this. It takes a little while to get through. And it's not always a piece of cake to get all of it done. I want you to notice that in chat right now, Doug has uploaded the dictionary. So I want to make sure that you know about that piece because we're going to reference that a little bit today, show it to you. You can download it also here. This is the piece that the EduJedi work on with us and give us new definitions of terms that people need to look at. They categorize them. And it's basically a way to learn about what's going on inside digital curriculum. What are the characteristics of it? How does it all sort of be understood when you're looking at it? Because obviously digital learning is a different thing than when you're just doing analog and teaching in the classroom. When you're using all these things, you want to know what they're doing and kind of the mechanisms in them and the characteristics and does it actually have instructional use for you? So that's what that dictionary piece is really all about. And there's an article in there I'll probably talk a little bit about today with steps and advices for administrators and then advices for teachers. All right, so the demographics of the survey sort of changed because in 2020 we did one survey. And in 2021, we did two, and you'll notice there's a lot of rural that answered. So what really happened during the pandemic was everyone put devices out for every kid. We're at like 95% capacity now. There's still some places waiting for machines, hard to get them. A lot of refurbished machines going on in the market. We've been hearing those stories a lot from schools and districts. So I want to kind of walk you through how our analysts evaluate the data, just so you understand. When we're looking at the data, we come at it from a particular perspective, and that is this maturity scale of how districts sort of start into what they're doing with technology and how they mature over time. And they generally start with device rollouts and various apps popping up on the landscape. And device rollouts are really, more of a tactic than a strategy, and most districts learn that really quickly. Then they have various teaching and learning methods and models piloted all over the landscape, and things are kind of wild. Then they get into mass training. And the most mass training that was done the last 2 years was, of course, on video conferencing platforms using Google Docs or Microsoft and Teams and all that, Google Class. That was a huge amount of the training done, but there wasn't really a lot of training done in the high value digital courseware, the stuff that's, sort of lays out all of the pathway or does remedial learning for you. And then they get into sort of looking at all their apps and saying, we got some duplicates here. What's going on? We don't need all of these. And they maybe look at how much they're being used. And even though maybe they didn't do any training on them, they start retiring some of them because they just weren't being used. They don't have time for that. And then they do a full inventory, which maybe should have been done earlier, but this is generally how it goes. And they start looking at all the things they have. And maybe the inventory doesn't go all the way down into what files do the teachers have, because they have a lot of individual little documents laying around and links to things. But they look at what they've purchased at least. And then they go, well, we should really train on this so people know how to use this. And so they do a lot of more precision professional development. Then they go into a new level of access and resource equity, right? Like, so now they're realizing, hey, wait, just, one home connection when the kids are quarantined or whatever, or they're back out remote learning isn't good enough because there's 8 kids in that home. And so we need to have a different look at equity and access. And maybe access needs to go up to a level of having a single sign-on and that kind of thing. Then they start realizing they've been losing kids. And this is what we're hearing all over the country. There's 2 big, huge problems on the horizon. One is you're losing students in traditional public education. And so you start to think about ways you could maybe serve students in different ways with remote learning, hybrid learning, fully online virtual schools that you stand up, getting in more communication with the parents, which is maybe a parent camp over the summer, or you're offering high stakes testing to the homeschoolers, which allows you to count something at least, depending on the state, right? So, and the second biggest problem, obviously, is you can't get the teachers. So you're looking at how you can provide service in different ways, and structure is a really big theme that we're going to go through with you today. Of course, running behind this is the next level stage, and it starts out early, but really gets serious at this point for a lot of districts, and that is, how do we personalize for every learner? And that is because particularly during the pandemic, parents and grandparents and students started shopping online, and they found really valuable curriculum and things that would really personalize to them. And one of the things they realized when they were looking at all this is that, the school maybe isn't doing it this way. They're not really personalizing for my student. And their definition of personalization is at the pace and at the point that student is at, which is different than public education normally looks at you. You're looking at personalization from the lens of sort of the manufacturing line of students by age batches, in grades, in classes. And that is not anymore, since the pandemic, the way that personalization is truly defined by the average American. So personalization starts to be a really huge conversation with a lot of ramifications. And then you discover that maybe there's something that could Uberize the personal pace of every student and make it so that they were automatically cohorted in their time of need for the next point they would intersect with the teacher. That's a new emerging and disruptive technology. And the end point is really when the school or district is looking at more than the pace and path and the curriculum and the things and the digital, and they're looking at how do we craft a fantastic experience for every individual student. So they're looking at things through that lens of experiential learning, and they're using a lot more logistics. Now, logistics as a whole theme overall is kind of a new discussion point since the pandemic, because logistics got really hard during the pandemic. And people are realizing now, even if they've tried to go, quote unquote, back to normal, there is no normal anymore, because the parents saying, when we were remote, we only had to have like 2 hours of study a day, and now the kid has to be in school all day. Could we change that up? Could we just not come on Fridays? Or, I'm going to go do something that's with grandma that's 3 hours away, and my kid's just going to log on. Is that okay with you today? And so they are disaggregating your normal master schedule just sort of automatically and thinking that it's fine. And it's kind of blowing you up as a traditional public school. So when you start to think about logistics, it's the time and space in use that is in question. Never really was questioned as much before, but now everybody's sort of pulled into that fray. All right, so when we asked the question, what pressures are you feeling? What surprised us was that administrators said time and space was their number one problem. It still is. You could have kids going to quarantine, teachers going to quarantine at any time. And like I said, they're putting pressure on you to say, the model, could we not have this day or have that day or a half day? Or I only want to do this hour. Could we not be on campus all the time, but still have labs and hands-on stuff happening? And then there's that attrition problem, which is in the thousands for a lot of districts. And then teachers are echoing that. In their survey, they said student absences. A lot of times they tell us directly, we can't find the kids. They just don't show up on Zoom, or they don't show up live. They think they can come in via Zoom, but we didn't have Zoom set up. And then time management, huge issue. And that's a reflection of the lack of sophisticated logistics. So those are the biggies. All right, so let me tell you what's happening with the students. And, the feds are not admitting this, that so many students have opted out. See the yellow highlighted at the bottom. 37% or 21 million students are opt-outers from the traditional public school. This is huge out of the 56 million kids. So now they're either in public online, they're in charters, they're in private schools, they're in homeschools. A small percentage of those could be counted as your remote learners who don't want to attend physically on campus, but they just want to attend via web conferencing. And some schools are allowing that. We did have a slight gain in 2021 over 2020 when schools went back to normal, so to speak. But it's still, nationally, we're still losing kids to alternatives. And sometimes some districts are saying they just don't even know what happened to them at all. And I'm expecting in 2022, a lot more school districts to run reach out programs to find out what happened to kids, because they literally many times don't have any idea where they went, or if they're even in school at all, online or otherwise trying to homeschool. All right, so here's what was spent. Slightly less than 2020, because that was a huge increase year because so many devices were bought, but still huge jump, right? 2.2 billion is a lot of money spent on hardware and major systems and digital curriculum, a little bit of paper in that, networks, but a little bit more moderate increase than the year before, which was $7.5 billion jump. Where it was spent was, a lot of hardware still. That grew by 200 million. Major software systems didn't grow like we thought, right? It would do. Like the major software systems are your learning management systems, your student information systems, your big office suites that you're buying subscription for everyone for, and other sort of framework systems like learning object repositories and that kind of thing. That doesn't include the digital curriculum side, the actual instructional materials that are in digital form, and it doesn't include staffing. So in digital curriculum spend, that was at 14.9 billion. It was up by 1.8 billion. It's $200 million less than we predicted. Paper spend down again. There's still a lot of paper purchasing, and that is appropriate. It depends on the age grade, right? Like what age are the kids? Do they want to touch things, or do we really want them on screens when they're kind of spreading germs to each other's screens all the time? So there's a lot of questions in that. And I don't think paper is ever really going to go away, but it really has gone down. I mean, that market 15 years ago was a $25 billion spend. It's really down. So this area is expected to increase even more because, and I'll walk you through all the reasons, but the high value professional grade digital curriculum is in high need and sometimes not identified for how much it's needed, because schools and districts aren't really looking at the labor cost of build all your own stuff. All right, so here's the alarming thing, and I usually talk about this when I come out and I see you in person, but the K-12 market is still at 14.9 billion. It is growing faster. It was only a 5% compound annual growth rate, that's CAGR, when we went into the pandemic, and then it jumped, right? But it's still way behind the consumer purchase. At 28.5 billion and growing at 15%, it used to be growing at 25%, slowed down a little bit because the economy's down. But there was a consumer increase by 5.7 billion. So that's the shopping trend that happened in the pandemic. A lot of people thought, I'm just going to Google this, math for a fifth grader, right? Math for a 12-year-old, right? And they found stuff. And some of the stuff you don't even know about in public education because you're not looking from a consumer lens. Homeschoolers, huge amount of purchase in that area. There's whole companies that provide all the materials you need to standards. You just buy a subscription and walk your student through there. The global app market was 582 billion. So the learning stuff in the global app market is a small percentage of that, but it's still, the spend is way higher. And if you really think this through, what you're seeing when you look at this graph is a disintermediation of education from the way it's been, because this is similar to Amazon taking over the retail space. The retailers down, 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 Amazon up, up, up. So this is really what you're looking at. This is the threat. This is the threat horizon that's actually coming at you, and it's not easily recognized. And one of the reasons it isn't is because so many public schools are really tied to have to stay the same structure and their humanness, right? Like use of teachers in classrooms. And I think there's a lot of ways, and we're going to talk about that today, to examine how the perfected use of the humans. At what point is human teaching really important? And that leads you into sort of an identity crisis of what is a teacher? What are they doing? And that's the conversation that we're hearing all over the country. All right, so we also ask, which schooling model is most in use? And we found 0% say pure traditional, like paper, buying textbooks all the time. They're all digital in some aspect. So 41% say they're digital traditional, 24% say they're blended or flipped traditional. Teachers responded slightly differently. I mean, if you notice that, it's kind of wild. If you're not familiar with some of these models, right? Hybrid simultaneous is what everyone was doing during the thick of the pandemic, right? They were trying to put school on Zoom, basically. Hybrid logistics is sort of a new way of doing things, and hybrid high flex blends the traditional model with a new hybrid logistics model, which is essentially the Uberization of the learning togetherness point. Hopefully that makes sense to you. Ask questions if you aren't understanding all of this stuff that I'm talking about. Happy to have you ask. All right, so then we ask, what schooling model is of most interest? So you're something now, but you want to be something else. What did you say? And we had two tie, and one was blended flip traditional, which is sort of like just load people up, all the students with homework. And then when you're physically together, you're sort of blending some technology in, but really the moment is purposeful when you're together, right? Your togetherness is doing something together. Discussions, projects, station rotation, all the things that you do, maybe lecture. And then their hybrid high flex, that model uses the old structure plus a carve out of time for asynchronous personalized learning. So it's sort of sticking two models together. It's high interest. All right, so then we ask, what are you doing with devices? And of course, a lot of tablets went into the market. This graph is sort of, some districts are huge and some are small. So you can kind of get an idea here just of all the machines going to the market, urban, suburban, rural. A lot of Chromebooks, the favored device, obviously. A lot of laptops, most of those go to teachers. A lot of desktops, also teachers and administrative personnel. And then we saw an uptick in gaming. So a lot of districts have, up to 100, up to 500 devices that are the high level gaming virtual reality stuff. And that's because esports took off. All right. So what other technologies in play here is learning management systems. 74% say they have that in use. I want to modify that in your thinking though, because there's a lot of districts that think that Google Class is an LMS, but it's really not. Neither is Teams, Microsoft Teams. Considering use, 13% plan to purchase more of. That could also mean renewing licenses, 6%, 7% not considering. So you have a lot of technologies listed here. There's more on the next slide. What I want to draw your attention to is that there's a high plan to purchase student coding, high plan to purchase robotics, high plan to use better audio enhancement. So what this is telling you is the classroom is changing to be more hands-on, right? So that means you're moving your learning and the ingestion of reading materials and that kind of stuff into the digital, maybe homework time. Look at esports, 36% considering use. A lot of that's because we watched districts during the pandemic say, okay, you can be on the esports team if you keep your other grades up, otherwise we're going to kick you off the team. So a lot of esports activities going on out there. Live tutoring systems, one of the biggest growth areas in the investment markets right now. This is because of the lack of teachers. You can't get them. So you turn to how we're going to use maybe a live tutoring organization or somebody like Edison Learning, who has a cadre of teachers that they can load up behind. If you have a teacher sort of go down in quarantine, they can sort of like roll one in right away. But you're already using their courses. And your teachers have been taught how to use them, but if, like I said, one goes down, they can like put one in behind you temporarily or for however long you need. Motion tracking video cameras, huge, because like I said, if you have some remote learners who just don't want to come in, but they're still affiliated and enrolled, then all your teachers have to be on camera the whole day. And then dynamic digital inventory, high interest, drones, high interest, virtual reality headsets. Some districts just aren't into that right now. Hybrid logistics is a new technology, so it's not getting that much traction yet, but we expect it to. And then, of course, learning object repositories, we do expect that to take off. That's a not very well-known technology area, but it's kind of like a big walled garden of all your digital instructional discrete pieces, as well as full courseware all in one place. So we also looked at planning and scheduling logistics, and we're surprised what we found. 27% are mostly manual. You have your pacing guides over in disassociated documents or spreadsheets. And then what your teacher has to do is look at those. What am I supposed to teach when? Oh, what are those standards again? Oh, and there's added instructions from the pacing guru of the district level. And so now I got to look at all that. And then I got to look at the master schedule for what hours I'm teaching, which weeks, and et cetera. And then I got to go somewhere else to build a lesson. So I've got like to triangulate all this stuff. This is kind of ridiculous in the age of technology, but it's happening. You also have unconnected systems, right? So that's 18% of the market, where, again, pacing people create the master schedules and manual documents, start mandates and all that stuff. And then the school builds all these individual things, but it's still sort of disassociated from the teacher's work. And this is a lot to read on the slide, I realize. And then you have some connected systems where the schedule with teacher planning's in the same place, but maybe not the pacing guides. And then you have connected personalized, which is a surprise. I don't know if people really knew what they were answering, because that's 21% of the market, but that would be like an individual calendar for the individual teacher with everything they need in one place to look at what they're supposed to do and then plan in the same place. That's a rare technology. It's very few systems that I've ever seen. Okay, so the number of staff in the school or district in schools who work more than 50% of their time on logistics, this is skewed by size of district, I realize. But huge numbers in here, more than 1,000 for 3% of the market. And then we asked, how does planning and execution for digital resources occur? 39% say the teachers do all the lesson planning and choosing of all the digital resources. So think about that and then spread it across all of America and realize what's happening to the 6-point-something million, or actually, I'm sorry, it's 3-point-some million teachers in K-12. If you had higher ed, it's more, right? But in K-12. And then 29%, the district just issues the pacing guide and maybe some playlists. They've actually accumulated, like, this would be good for this, this, and this. You know, you're on your own after that. Still teachers doing all the lesson build out. And then there's the issue, the pacing guide only districts, 21%. And then at centralized, where the planning of all the digital resources and the lessons arranged into courses, that's really just the virtual schools doing that. But we're expecting way more schools and districts to get on board with building their full pathways, because in that way you could disaggregate time and space. Students can pace individually, and sort of some can zoom ahead, maybe mid-year get kicked up to the next grade. Maybe the slower ones, you can see that they're slower and you re-cohort accordingly. I know this sounds complicated, but that's why we're going to talk about logistics. But that's a rare thing. So this is a major point that you have to look at from the logistics point of view, and the load on the teachers. Okay, I'm just going to make sure I'm looking at any questions. You guys have questions, put them in chat so I can see them. All right, so we asked, what are the number of digital content resources that you pre-purchase as a school or district and make available for teaching and learning, which are your professional grade repositories and discrete learning objects, videos, ebooks, or lesson document in any file form your professional learning apps, and your courseware. So 66% have between 100 and 1,000. You can get all the way up into more than 20,000. And then you got some places like Houston ISD who have more than 2 million, right? These massive libraries of stuff. But those are essentially walled gardens. Like, you don't need to go shopping out on Teachers Pay Teachers and other sites to find stuff. It's just play in this pen, which makes it easier to make sure things are aligned to standards and all that, and they're secure and all that other stuff. So then we asked, what estimate to the teacher are the number of digital content resources you personally keep on file or personal accounts? So essentially, these are hidden and they're not in your repositories at the school or district level. This is stuff they're keeping on their own machine or in their own cloud account. And this is important to understand because if you have a teacher who goes into quarantine or gets sick or leaves, that's all the stuff they had personally filed that would be very hard for a new person to just pick up and run with, right? Like I dare anybody to figure out my filing system because I can't even figure it out. So 100 to 500 pieces is a lot. 66.7% say that. And then, you've got a lot of the comments in there were like jokingly saying, yeah, I have so many, I can't even count them all. And I'm confused about my own filing system. I had to switch machines, and then there was a different cloud account, toggling between cloud accounts. We had one superintendent when we were up in Boise that we videoed commenting the fact that, they implemented Teams, but one of the problems that the parents and the students were saying was different teachers nested their file folders differently. That means, major folder title, subfolder underneath the subfolder. Whereas some teachers were just go to the main label folder and everything was in there. And then others were like nesting and sub-nesting, which made it so that between your teachers, students and parents had questions like, I can't find something, this person did it this way, and then now it's over here, and like, I can't figure it out. And that's the issues that are coming up that create more traffic for the parents and students and teachers. Okay. So the character of digital lessons and planning, what administrators, teachers cite. So this is mostly the teacher side. So 26% of teachers custom build on their own knowledge. That's a huge percentage. And I understand it, different subjects, right? So certain ones they build their own stuff on their own knowledge, but really, a teacher's competing with the open internet for all knowledge in the universe. This is a lot. But if that's what's happening, you might want to sort of look at that, like if it was successful for the teacher, if it's not successful. 13% use the open internet, so they're out there shopping. 18% use approved repositories. 36% use some mix of build their own and then stuff they found that you gave them. 7% just coach. Now, those are mostly the online schools. That all the stuff's built, and then they're maneuvering around that to customize and pull kids to the curb and basically handle whatever they're not getting and maybe dish them some additional stuff, right? Here's the surprising thing about this data. Only 6.7% of teachers have 50% or more of their lesson build out as they go into the year, which means if you look across your year for that entire course of study, somewhere in there, the teacher's now planning for the next week and then planning for the next week and planning for the next week. So the railroad tracks are not laid, right? There's no way you can really 100% personalize pace, because if a kid went all the way to the end, they'd have to wait for the teacher to start putting the tracks down of the rest of the lessons. So that's important to understand from a logistics point of view of how you would get to full personalization for every student. This is what another thing we asked, which shocked us to the core. This is like seriously shocking. We asked of these 3 tasks that are normal for you as a teacher, how much time do you spend finding digital lesson materials? And then how much time do you spend taking those materials and building around that, the digital content and lesson sequences, right? How much time do you spend doing that? Like, you got to put things in order, read this, then watch this video, and then do this quiz, blah, blah, blah. And then after you finish the lesson and you distribute it out or post it, you're getting pelted with questions and I can't find that thing, and the parent calls you and this occurs and texting goes on. How much are those 3 things together? So notice what the administrator said versus the teachers. Total difference. This tells you one really important thing, that the administrators are not looking at what's going on with the workload of their teachers. But here's the shocking thing. Teachers say, 24% of them say they're spending over 30 hours a week on those three things. You know what that tells me? They're not having time to teach. They can't personalize. They're too busy being maestros of all the stuff, right? And that is the biggest reason why you say, as an administrator, let's buy some pre-built courseware and train teachers in it and use that. Because number one, it'll probably give us dashboards. So, and we have continuity of operations across all our teachers that way. And number two, it'll save them time. They will want to fight us on it, probably, because they're used to doing all their own stuff and they're very much guru minded about, this is my stuff and this works. But at the same time, like I said, you lose continuity of operation, and you have to start paying attention to this, how much time they're spending being digitized versus digital, because moving to digital has ramifications for workload that were different than the analog classroom, and you have to start observing that. Hoping you guys are going to make comments, like help me with comments. I'd love it. Okay, so then we also ask, I apologize because, I must have been overwhelmed when I spelled overwhelmed on this. I have another slide where it's corrected on, but anyway, this one wasn't corrected. 74% say of the teachers say they're overwhelmed or burnt out. That's partly pandemic, okay, because it's a very stressful period. People are still in recovery. It's a very emotional time. But it's also all these other pressures. And what we're having superintendents say to us is, when we really ask them, it's like, what's happening? Are we going to be back to normal? And they're like, no, I can't quite put my finger on it, but this is not normal. We're not in a normal time. We're in some post thing, and I can't quite put my finger on what's kind of going wrong. It seems like it's a big list of things. It's a perfect storm of weirdness. And people are overwhelmed, burnt out. I don't know what to do about all this, right? So there is social emotional stress for your teachers and all that other kind of stuff. But more importantly, there's look at the workload and realize you're in a logistics restructuring moment. That's kind of what's happening. Okay, so we asked what other PD is needed, and the teacher said these are the biggest issues. 82.5% say newly having to teach students online via video conferencing. Okay, so that's still going on. Because like I said, you might have remote kids at any time because parents are like, well, I'm not going to take you to school today. I think you might have a temperature. Or you're just going to go in via Zoom. Oh, what? The teacher's not going to turn Zoom on today? Well, there's no link and blah, call. So that's still happening. And then 74% of respondents are citing they've got like all these new apps and subscription sites. They're not well trained on them. They need training, right? Or they need little clips from the provider, which maybe the provider isn't providing. And you need those. And they need to get their act together too. Emotional impacts, huge. All these change schedules, alternating days, alternating weeks. These kids can be in this half of the building because they're unvaccinated, and these kids be over here. It's a weird time. Different uses of spaces. We looked at the New York way they did things. It was kind of wild. They had, half buildings. Nobody can go in this entrance unless they're student A type of kid, and student B's going over there. Having to track down students. This is a really big one. There's absences that are completely unexplained, and teachers are spending a lot of time doing that. And then some students gained a lot in the pandemic, working from home. They were loving it, about 50% of the kids. And then other kids sort of curled up in a ball and they couldn't learn. And what was found out is that humans aren't all alike. They don't move on the assembly line all the same. And when you disarray the assembly line, and then some are at home and some are, maybe still coming to the building, it gets pretty wild. And what you also learn is that the social kids learn because they're in a social environment and they're mimicking the other kids around them and feeding off their energy. And that's what helps them learn, right? And then, of course, you have those other kids who are like, this is great. I just want to be online. I don't want to go anywhere. But then you have to think about with the parent, like, that's all well and good, but don't you want your kid a little bit socialized? Let's do this. All right. So that's all the things that are happening. I'm going to make sure I have my time notation. Am I supposed to be on to another thing? 5 minutes. Okay. So I'm going to give you guys just a really rough look at the future. I got 5 minutes to do it. we played this game. This was a game board that you're looking at a couple years ago. And there was this future of hybrid logistics sort of discussion that went on as soon as the pandemic started. So we got a lot of people calling us going, you know, that game we played where we all on different pathways and the teachers were over in offices. And then it was like, you know, they would be Uberized at the right point for the right cohort, and they would all run out to the class and have that moment. And then the kids would go back into the study halls, like they were studying at home, but they were in the hall. So they're in building, but then some of them were remote, and all this was happening. It was totally different. Let's build that. Let's do that. So that became, during the pandemic, a look at basic organizing. So this is your old structure where everybody's like on the manufacturing line, right? And the students are moving, but the teachers are all stationary in classroom. And that evolved to a discussion of how we can put kids in homerooms to do the on-demand network model. They're all on different paces. And they intersect with teachers for those hands-on projects and lecture moments and things in a different way. They're not like, the teachers aren't always in the classroom. They're watching the pace of kids. They're swooping in and pulling kids to the curb and saying, okay, got to help you because you're running too far behind, and all that kind of stuff. So what we found is that a lot of schools are really interested in this right now, like really interested in this because lack of teachers, losing students. But they don't want to go all the way. They want to pilot maybe their CTE and their electives. And so they're going to mutate their Carnegie units in their core and open up more study hall time and pilot remedial and CTE and electives in that time. And that's called hybrid high flex. So I'm not going to go over these big takeaways. I'm just going to tell you that the hybrid logistics project is a look at the future of learning being completely pace personalized. And that goes into this sort of structure. Okay, so how could you as a school set unset meetings, meaning floating meetings, kind of like when you call an Uber and it's a group Uber at the airport, and it's cheaper that way rather than just you ride alone. You're going to wait for like 4 or 5 other people to be picked up, and then you're all going to go from Denver airport all the way into Denver. How do you create those floating ones so that kids could accrue in their pace of study to a point, and then when they're all there, it triggers to the calendars and sets the room and sets the meeting, post the Zoom link for the kids that are at home? How would you also have layered calendars, and how would you also put all your pacing and standards in the same place as your lesson building? So those are the big problems. So that's what we looked at, creating the ideal of. So you would want to create something that is like this. This is like calling an Uber only, so creating a floating meeting. And then you would take that link and put it over in your Google Class or your LMS as one of the steps that the student would do. So they do instruction, hit the link. Okay, now I'm enrolled in the class. And it would kind of look like this. You could have any amount of instructions. You could have 1 instruction or 20. But let's say your little purple girl here didn't do the stuff. So she hasn't hit the link. So the class hasn't triggered to the calendar. And the first 3 kids that already got there, they're waiting for you. You'd have to have a way to unenroll that one guest in that moment of come together and maybe push them back to the next cohort, or else docket them for direct instruction to catch them up. But if you did that, then automatically it would trigger and the first 3 would be enrolled in the cohort. Like maybe it's 30, maybe it's 3. And then you would be able to do this across an entire course of study. Just insert your live moments. So it's a backward engineering of, we're always together in the class. Now we're not always together, and we're coming together only in precision moments as needed based on the pace of the student, which you try to do in many classes now, but you're cohorting within a very narrow frame. These 30 kids together, these are the fast ones, these are the slower ones, kind of a thing. This is completely disaggregating them. And then what happens to you is, I'm going to go back a second, is you could maybe hold one student in math because they're too far ahead, and double them up on language for the amount of time they're spending on it because they're behind in language. Those sort of flexibilities are now in the expectations of the public. And that's the way you make sure that everyone achieves. And also that your ones that are super smart can just skip up to the next grade. So that's sort of what's happening with hybrid logistics. I think I'm almost out of time. So I want to ask if you have questions about this, because this is something that's being created inside as a demonstration project inside the nostory.com that was already stood up by the Learning Council. It's the work that we've been doing during the pandemic to make sure that this little thing called a which is echoing the word Uber, can be created to disaggregate pace and space. So space and time change for you. And the use of calendaring is layered so that you can create your sections and segments and rotations and blocks and your classes and your courses in a very algorithmic way and make easy changes. Whereas the master schedules today are a little bit more difficult, and they don't accommodate 100% soul pace. They're built for the old world, and we're in a new world now. Okay, so if you haven't seen the EduJedi digital resource guide, make sure you also download that. I'm going to go back to that for a second, because this is your gift from the EduJedi, who are all terrific people. It looks like this.